Widely considered the father of Western philosophy, he shaped the intellectual trajectory of the next 2,000 years, yet he never wrote a single word. Born in Athens around 470 BC, Socrates grew up in a household built on physical labor. His father was a skilled stonemason, and his mother worked as a midwife. As a young man, he was drawn to the emerging fields of natural science. He studied the heavens and the earth, looking for mechanical explanations for how the cosmos operated. But he eventually grew frustrated. Understanding the orbit of the sun or the mineral composition of rocks offered no guidance on how to live a good human life. If cataloging the physical mechanics of the universe couldn't tell a person right from wrong, then what actually constituted true wisdom? The answer began with a cryptic message. A close friend traveled to the Oracle of Delphi and asked the priestess a simple question: "Is anyone wiser than Socrates?" The oracle replied that no one was wiser. Socrates was entirely perplexed by this. Convinced the oracle was mistaken, he set out to find men who were smarter than him. He took to the streets and systematically interrogated Athens' most prominent politicians, celebrated poets, and master artisans. This diagram represents his method, a process known as the Olympus. Instead of lecturing, Socrates asked questions. He would take a person's core assumption, test it with hypothetical scenarios, and systematically strip away logical inconsistencies. Eventually, the person he was questioning would reach a state of aporia, a complete logical dead end where they had to admit they lacked the answer. He compared this exhausting process to his mother's profession. He saw himself as an intellectual midwife. He didn't plant knowledge into an empty mind, but by asking the exact right questions, he could help people give birth to the truth that was already dormant inside them. After cross-examining the supposedly brilliant men of his city, Socrates finally understood the oracle's meaning. The politicians and poets falsely believed they had all the answers. Socrates was the wisest man in Athens because he possessed the honesty to admit his own ignorance. History usually pictures him as an old, barefoot sage wandering the market. But for decades of his life, the man whose name translates to safe and strength served as a highly trained, stocky hoplite warrior. He spent years fighting in the Peloponnesian War, deployed across the Aegean Sea in multiple massive campaigns. Fellow soldiers documented his absolute indifference to physical suffering. While others huddled in thick furs, Socrates would march through heavy ice and snow, wearing nothing but his standard thin military cloak and no shoes. At the Battle of Potidæa, when his young pupil Alcibiades was wounded and fell on the battlefield, Socrates broke the safety of the phalanx. He charged into the chaos of enemy lines alone, hoisted the young man onto his shoulders, and carried him, along with his heavy armor, safely out of the slaughter. This battlefield resume raises a question. How does raw physical bravery connect to the quiet act of asking questions in a public square? He proposed a radical thesis about human psychology. Virtue is knowledge. He believed the mind and human action were completely inseparable. According to Socrates, no human being commits an evil or selfish act intentionally. When people do wrong, they do so out of a flawed calculation. They are acting out of ignorance, convinced that their terrible choices will ultimately benefit them. If you follow that logic, the reverse is also true. If a person achieves true clarity and actually possesses the knowledge of what is right, they find it impossible to act with cowardice or commit an injustice. This investigative discipline served as the forge for his character. Investigating the mind was the practical mechanism he used to become a good person, ensuring his actions always matched his understanding of the truth. But teaching people to expose ignorance made him a target. His relentless public questioning routinely embarrassed the powerful elites who governed the Athenian establishment. When Athens suffered a catastrophic military defeat to Sparta, the city's democratic system collapsed. A brutal, Spartan-backed oligarchy known as the 30 Tyrants briefly took control, executing political opponents and confiscating property. Once democracy was restored, the citizens looked for someone to blame. They noted that several prominent traitors, including the rogue general Alcibiades and one of the bloodiest tyrants, Critias, had been former pupils of Socrates. The city was traumatized and desperate for a scapegoat. A philosopher who refused to stop questioning the status quo provided a convenient target for a state in crisis. In 399 BC, 3 private citizens brought formal charges against him. They accused the 70-year-old philosopher of impiety against the gods of the state and of corrupting the youth of Athens. Instead of begging for his life, Socrates used his time on the stand to lecture the jury on their own moral ignorance. When convicted and asked to propose his own punishment, he mocked the court by suggesting he be rewarded with free meals for life, much like an Olympic champion. Even after receiving the death penalty, he refused to escape the city. He argued that breaking the laws of Athens just to buy a few more years of life would be an injustice, invalidating the integrity he had spent his entire life building. He spent his final hours debating the nature of existence before drinking a cup of poisonous hemlock. As the paralysis set in, he remained observant and calm, describing the numbness in his body to his friends with the same detached, logical precision he had used to analyze his own thoughts. The painter Jacques-Louis David took a deliberate historical liberty with this famous scene. Sitting quietly at the foot of the bed is Plato. He wasn't actually there that day, but placing him in the room underscores his role as the student who would go on to write down the dialogues, preserving everything we know about his teacher. Socrates left behind the thesis that the unexamined life is not worth living. By prioritizing the act of questioning over a static set of answers, he provided a tool for intellectual self-correction that continues to challenge every modern authority.